Welcome to Developing a Credential Flywheel to Power Program Growth. I'm Patty Wheeler, and I lead communications and events at Accredible, and I'm excited to shepherd you through this next hour where you're going to hear from Accredible's Chief Growth Officer, Duncan Mitchinson, on why and how organizations are creating a credential flywheel to power program growth. And then that's followed by a fireside chat with Julian Clement from Workato and Carly Weeks from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, where they're going to discuss how they are finding success and growing their programs by activating their credential flywheels in the real world. So we're going to have time at the end for a brief Q&A. I'm going to kick things off with our poll. What are your top training and certification priorities for the next 12 months? Love to see it. We've got lots of pathways, learner pathways and journeys being developed, growing your program revenue. That's great. Oh, you know what's taking the lead here is increase program enrollments and renewals is really there. Well, it looks like developing learner pathways and journeys and increasing program enrollment, renewals, and growing program growth seem to be in the lead, and improving the recipient experience. I love to see all that. Great. Thanks everybody for answering. Really appreciate those insights. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to Duncan Mitchinson, who's going to walk us through the credential chasm. Duncan, take it away.
Thanks, Patty. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Sounds like we've got a pretty broad audience, which is fantastic. Really excited to welcome you to the webinar today. So we're going to cut this into two parts. I'm going to do a very short presentation, about 10 minutes, just as a foundation, I suppose, for the conversation to come afterwards. And then we're very fortunate to have some fantastic guest speakers joining us as well, in Julian and Carl. So the rest of this will be a fireside chat. I have some questions which I'm kind of burning to ask them. Please do put your questions in as well, and we'll hope to get to them. Hopefully around digital credentialing. If they're not about digital credentialing, we will try to answer, but can't promise to know the answer. Perfect. Let's dive in. So over the past decade, the labour market and post-secondary education landscape have fundamentally changed as digital technologies and demand for alternative pathways to employment disrupt every industry and every job. Now, with this shift, we've seen an explosion of alternative credentials, micro-credentials, digital badges, and industry-recognized certificates, all intended to improve the classroom to workforce pipeline and meet the rising demand for upskilling and reskilling. Now, most educational institutions grappling with this decreased enrollment and competitive pressure from the disruptors have hyper-focused on student employability and expanded certificates and special non-degree credentials to broaden their reach and diversify revenue streams. Now, I think the onus is on them to ensure that learners recognize that their skills are transferable as students begin to weigh the cost of ROI versus immediate access to jobs. And I think this graph is super interesting to demonstrate that. So I'm not here saying that the degree is dead. If you look at the blue line, it's clear that, and this projects into 2030, as you'll see below, that there's clear growth there. But look at that hockey stick on the non-degree. So there's an exponential increase in non-degree programs being offered. And I think this really highlights the dramatic growth that we're seeing in alternative credentials. Now, this is coming from associations, from businesses and other institutions that have actually expanded their offerings by creating career and technical credentials that help learners acquire new skills, update their existing skills, and signal the competencies they have. And it's a broad amount of companies here. So we've got huge associations like IEEE, one of the biggest in the world, all the way through to some of those kind of house names of tech companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., all now issuing alternative credentials. Many employers are also experimenting with alternative education pathways to employment and starting to expand by their hiring based on skills and learning, not just looking at previous jobs or degrees. And they're doing that in order to fill the skills gap. And I think also to start creating a more diverse, well-rounded set of employees. But I think a lot of them are still struggling to assess and verify competencies and skills for a job. And we've got some interesting stats here to kind of back that up. In the last year, more than 45% of employers on LinkedIn explicitly use skill data to fill their roles, which is a 12% increase year on year. This stat, though, I think is super interesting to me. 1 in 5 US job postings no longer require a degree, which is up 4% year on year, which doesn't sound like massive growth, but I don't think we have to go too far back to see a world where a lot of high-paying jobs were you must have a degree. So we, really showcasing that shift towards focusing on skills and less perhaps on a piece of paper. And again, I'm not saying that a degree isn't valuable. I think there's still huge value in a degree, but there are alternatives that are starting to surface. Now, in the middle of all of this, we have the learners, and they're trying to make sense of a rapidly complexifying landscape. With so many different options varying in costs, requirement, quality, and portability between employers and industries, how do they select the credentials most likely to deliver a return on investment? We have young people exiting K-12 making one of the biggest decisions of their lives with very little data to suggest which will give them the best outcome. So as we've shifted towards this skill-based learning and hiring labor market, where the new currency is digital, transferable, and verifiable proof of skills and competencies, we're seeing a credential chasm. A chasm between issuers who are meeting these market and learner demands for digital credentials and delivering value throughout the entire learner journey, and in turn, growing their programs, and those who aren't, and by default are losing relevance, market share, and revenue. So unfortunately, I think many have settled for the traditional paper or PDF credentials. And I don't think I'm here saying paper is dead, no one should issue paper, because I think that would be unfair. I do think that there are certain markets that say, high stakes credentials where there's still learner demand. And for me, that's what should drive this. I don't think I see a future, or at least in the near case, where people are maybe going up and scanning a QR code to get their degree. I think it's a great opportunity to issue paper. However, I think only issuing paper or PDF is costly for all parties, right? Issuers, learners, employers. I believe no one wins from that scenario. So if we take those three, let's look at a credential issuer. If we just issue paper, the learner connection ends at issuance. There's limited to no sharing because of the friction to share. I guess we occasionally see people, if you look through LinkedIn, you see people who have taken a photo of them, really excited, but for the issuer, there's zero visibility into that sharing. Who opened it? Where was it shared? And ultimately, did it drive growth? Was there business value? If I look at the learners, paper or PDF credentials, we've already said, they're not easily shareable. They're not easily verifiable. They can't show those skills and competencies. And they don't provide employers a high resolution snapshot that represents a credential's context or criteria or the achievements. Ultimately, in my opinion, they are less useful in the modern age in supporting career advancement. And finally, of course, we have the employers. And for me, when we look at paper or PDFs, the potential for fraud is massive. They're costly to verify. Sometimes they take weeks, if not months, to verify, which of course delays any job hiring decisions. And they're also not easy to decipher. The amount of effort the learner has invested into the credential or the skills and competencies that went into them. The way that we've been taught to issue credentials is perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Issuing a credential without it being digital, shareable, verifiable, and leading to a tangible career outcome and expecting program relevance and growth is like planting a seed without any sunlight and water. And I kind of want to reiterate here that I think, we like to say at Accredible about things that sometimes it's yes and. And for me, when I look at a paper or PDF, it's not you shouldn't be doing that. It's okay, well, we have to also be offering a supplement that is ready for the modern age. Hope is not lost, though, simultaneously, new education and training leaders have emerged, organizations that are not only awarding and recognizing their learners, but issuing digital credentials that learners want to and can easily share. And this is leading to program referrals and growth, and of course, returning learners. So I'll call a couple out here. So Programs increase course completion by 3x, which is huge. Completion, obviously a massive challenge across the education industry, and there's an opportunity to leverage digital credentials to drive further completions. Of course, Workato, we're going to hear from Julian shortly to really get into this one, but managed to increase credential share rate 9% and saw a huge 80% growth in program learners. And finally, Northwestern Kellogg, and we're going to hear from Carly as well today, increased credential share rate by 384% and program referrals by 112. So just some huge numbers. We're putting clear data behind this that showcase that digital credentials can underpin a program and drive massive opportunities in program growth. All of them have crossed the credential chasm by moving beyond traditional credentials and activating a credential flywheel of growth. On the left-hand side here, you can of course see the traditional model where we issue an achievement, the customer sends the credential and recipient receives it, interaction ends. we are trying to kick off a virtuous cycle here. This flywheel that we're trying to create, and we've split this into 3 sections, ultimately is designed to harness those recipients, encourage them to share, and attract more learners for you. So let's dive into each of these 3 sections. So the award stage, these issuers are rewarding learners instantly with a digital credential that showcases acquired skills, earning criteria, and evidence of learning that gives a competitive edge in the job market. And in this stage, we want to make it as simple as possible for a recipient of a credential to get that credential in real time and to be able to actually interact with it. Next, we want to give them the ability to amplify their accomplishments. We do that by giving them easy access to social media sharing, the ability to embed it onto an email, the ability to add it into a digital wallet. And we also then encourage issuers to engage with those credentials when they're online. This allows us to turn credentials into a referral machine for the program. Finally, we want to attract and enroll new learners engaged through the credential flywheel, as well as being able to recommend additional courses for the original learner to continue their journey. And because they're using a leading digital credential platform, they have the data and insights into everything from social shares to credential click-throughs and course enrollment, etc. For me, it's not good enough for us to sit here and say, yeah, issue some credentials and you're going to see some program growth. We're in a data age. We have to be able to tangibly back this up with data and insights that showcases clear ROI from investing in a product like Accredible. So hopefully you can see at a high level how this works. We want to issue a credential. It's sent via an email that's white labeled that comes from your brand. We want the recipient to be able to click on it. With a single click, they're taken to the badge or certificate. We then want to encourage them to share those credentials by making it, again, a single click to get it into somewhere like LinkedIn or Facebook. That broadcasts that credential. It showcases the new skills and competencies that the learners received directly to their network. But of course, it has the secondary benefit of broadcasting your brand all the way across that network as well. And we white label the whole experience. So it is your brand that's being showcased with this moment of pride, with this positive message. We then want to pull learners back through that, fill your top of funnel, and allow you to have more course enrollments. But this is a virtuous cycle. Once they're in and enrolled and they complete, they get a credential, they share it, and the whole thing starts again, and thus the flywheel. So issuers that choose to use this credential flywheel model over traditional models have a huge advantage because they aren't the only ones helping grow their programs. Their learners become the biggest brand advocates and organically help grow programs. And of course, we want to help you do the same, which I assume is why you've come to this webinar. So we have invited 2 world-class credentialing leaders, and you've seen some of the stats already, to share their stories. So I'm going to shut up now. I promised it would be short. I'm going to invite Carly and Julian to join me. I'll stop sharing my screen as well. Perfect. And I've got a few questions. Carly, Julian, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time. So I'm going to ask this question to both of you, and maybe we'll start with Julian. So can you first tell me a little bit about your role, give me a brief overview of your program and who the learners are?
Happy to be here. So Julian Clement, I work on the credentialing and education team over at Workato, which is an automation and integration platform. So being able to kind of connect the dots between different business systems like your Salesforce, your LMSs, all those different types of things. And we've built out a pretty great program, a lot of it on the back of Accredible with our credentials.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julian. And same question, Carly.
And so I'm Carly, the Associate Director of Online Program Delivery at Kellogg Executive Education at Northwestern University. So I'm kind of in charge of all things delivery and logistic related for our online programs in executive education. And our programs are kind of built for professionals and executives looking to enhance their skills, but for online specifically, their schedules or geographical locations might not allow them to get to campus for a 3 to 5 day, sometimes longer program. So what we do is we offer the same high quality learning experience that our in-person programs offer that learners can kind of do on their own time and at their location of choice.
I'd love to hear what kind of prompted you to explore digital credentials in the first place. We'll stay with you, Carly, for this one.
Perfect. So, well, when we first started offering online programs, we kind of needed a way to get learners their certificates without having to send them that paper copy through the mail. And so my predecessor was actually already researching digital badges and credentials for her master's program at the time. So it kind of worked out perfectly. And she already understood the value and was able to really set us up for success early on. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. And it's been, only up from there.
Fantastic. And what about you, Julian?
For us, being a company offering credentials, really it was table stakes for us to have a digital credentialing program because so much of what we are doing already is cloud-based, is, app-based and things like that. So our learners expected it really. And I think you look across some of those companies, you mentioned the Slacks, the HubSpots, like all these other companies, like these people are expecting that their credentials are living in, the same place that they're doing all of their content work and they're doing all of their CRM work, things like that. So for us, it was really a no-brainer to have it be digital credentials and have it be kind of like at the touch of kind of like at everyone's fingertips in as integrated a way as possible.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, I touched on this around the idea of paper, the learner demand, but a lot of it is learner demands, desire to be able to have an asset that they can actually utilize in this on LinkedIn and Facebook, wherever it may be, to showcase those skills. So it makes total sense. And I'd love to hear a little bit about program goals, and especially it might be interesting because you guys are obviously a little bit more advanced in your digital credentialing. What are your goals now? What are you focused on? Julian, maybe back to you for that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because we really want to focus on growth. Like one of the big things that we always talk about is this idea of making Workato a career, right? And with automation being such a newer space, there is a lot of confusion. There's a lack of best practices a lot of times with this. And so one of the things that we're really trying to do with our program is not only teach people like how to use the product, all that type of stuff. I think that's your standard, education program at most of these companies. But one of the things that we've really tried to also do with this is say, hey, let's take this a step further and actually try to put some thought leadership into this space. What is enterprise automation? How do you think about it? Even with Gen AI, like how do you use Gen AI ethically within some of these automation and integration spaces? And so we're putting out a lot of courses and education that is actually not even product focused and telling you how point and click and what to do with the product, but talking to industry experts, pulling in all this thought leadership and kind of giving you a holistic approach as to the methodology that's really behind some of these topics that are really new.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity because I think on your side, especially where it's companies and we're seeing product training as the entry point. Yeah, beyond that, where do you go? And I agree that there's a huge opportunity when you think about this from a marketing perspective. You want to be engaging people much higher in the funnel, and you need to get them in that awareness stage so that, yeah, you can hopefully pull them down the funnel, of course. And I think if you're creating courses where you're engaging them on a totally different level, it's not about the product, it's not about us. We're talking about the industry. Yeah, super smart. And we've seen a few people enter the space in that way. And I think, yeah, I think it's a winner personally. What about you, Carly? I'd love to hear about goals for you. I know maybe slightly different.
Yeah. So, well, our program goals, as you mentioned before, we have had some successes specifically with Accredible so far, but we do still want to continue to improve our open and share rates just to help get some more traffic and eyes on the programs we have to offer and get, that in front of more learners. So yeah, working to just help increase that. And how can we also maybe help promote? So it's kind of some of the stuff you've literally just been talking about. How can we help promote that on LinkedIn so it doesn't just get in front of our learners, but maybe other audiences, people that follow us or some of our program leaders, et cetera.
And what type of programs are you offering, Carly? Could you give us a kind of idea of that?
Yeah, so we offer non-credit, non-degree programs for executives and professionals. Like I mentioned, I'm in charge of the online side, but we also do offer in person and live virtual, so on Zoom. And we have started early on with the digital credentials, but the pandemic kind of drove some of the in-person programs to start also issuing those credentials. But yeah, we offer quite a few different types of programs, marketing, leadership, some AI content as well, especially right now. And specifically for online, it is self-paced, or, it's paced, but it's also on your own time, so asynchronous. So we do try to make sure learners go through the program together. So it's not just people watching a video and having no support. So all of our programs also have program leaders who help guide people and give feedback to their assignments as well.
Fantastic. And you touched on, I know that you're trying to increase the open rates, the share rates, and the engagement. Obviously, the numbers that we talked about earlier. So that open rate of 80%, which is massive. And you've also been able to increase your credential share rate from 19 to 92%. Could you talk to me a little bit about the work that went into gaining those numbers? And then I guess I'd also love to hear about the next step that you're now taking.
Yeah, so we, like I mentioned, my predecessor really did set us up for success. So we early on implemented things like paying attention to the email subject line. So we were ensuring that learners knew that it was coming from us, and what the email actually contained, that it had their certificate that they've been working really hard to get. We make sure there are different calls to action within those emails. We've never really included the PDFs so that they do have to click through to Accredible so they can access that there if that's what we've also kind of been playing around with where this should go, but currently the button where they can access their certificates, a little bit below there, we include some language about adding their credential to their LinkedIn or sharing it with their network. We also have a link to the Accredible how-to guide, how to share on LinkedIn, just to help with that education around, this isn't just something for you to be proud of and looked at, but really to help share and engage with your audience. And, we're kind of playing around with moving that button to maybe be right next to the access button. So hopefully that can continue to increase the share rate.
Yeah, I really like that. I think the education piece for me is paramount. It's sometimes we make assumptions, and maybe more in Julian's world where there's a lot of tech savvy folks. They're used to these credentials, but some people are receiving these credentials for the first time. They're not sure exactly what it is. So for me, when I've looked at when we're creating a kind of education strategy, that starts way earlier as well. The email is a fantastic opportunity for us to highlight, what should you do with this credential? Why is it valuable? But actually, I think there's also huge opportunities throughout the course process, or in the kind of signposting earlier on, or in messaging, that allows us to say, hey, you're going to get a digital badge when you complete this. Here's what you should do. Here's why you should do it. Here's the value in that. So yeah, I think that education piece is really, really important. Perfect. And then Julian, coming to you again, it's a similar question, really. We talked about some of the numbers in there, that 9% increase year over year in share rate, which is great. And then of course that led to a 80% growth in program learners. I'd love to hear some of the biggest takeaways and biggest things you can share with us off the back of that journey.
Yeah, similar to Carly, we are really focused on how do we understand from our learners what they're looking for. So using the analytics that Accredible provides to say, what are people actually clicking on? Do they care about sharing to LinkedIn? Are they putting it in their email signature? Like those types of things. So we're focused a lot on the share rates, the email engagement, those pieces of it. The other thing that we do is really kind of like try and break down program growth. And we have kind of like what we call our 5 major categories, which is like content syndication, events, new content. We work a lot with higher ed, and then the like operationalization, which I always stumble on that word. But really, like in those buckets, especially on that last one, how do we make tweaks that are going to be scalable? And I think what we are really focused on is, as we're using Accredible with those email things, like, are there things that we can then apply across the board? Because we have, like we talked about, we have product credentials, we have things that schools are using for on and off ramps, but where are our learners seeing the most value from what we're giving them, and fine tuning that. So one of the big things that we noticed recently was that we had like a lot of clicks happening. And when we looked back at the emails, there were just so many options for people to click through. And so really saying, what do we care about? What do we want these learners to do? What is our main goal? Making that the big CTA, making sure that we are funneling people that way. And I think that type of kind of reflection and using the data that we were seeing is a big way that we're able to kind of like continue to grow and expand our program.
Yeah, I love that. And I touched on it in my talk, right? Briefly, the idea of being able to leverage the analytics, the insights to make smarter decisions around the credentialing program is really exciting. Are you getting granular like in each of those stages? Are you looking very specifically at, the audience is different, or do you feel like no, it's kind of broader than that?
We try to as best we can. And I think we're lucky in that we're able to use Workato to connect it to our data lake and things like that. So we're able to see what is this subset of people that is actually taking this credential. What kind of company are they coming from? What kind of roles are they coming from? Things like that. So, I know everyone doesn't have that type of like integration with data, but what I have found in Accredible is that, you do get you can kind of go and figure it out. It may take a little bit of work, but like you have all the analytics from people and kind of like what they've done with your credentials. And that opportunity is there to kind of get more granular. And it's interesting because, it's easy to try and, we talk about scale and all this stuff. It's easy to try and swath everything and be like, yeah, everyone's like this, but everyone isn't. And so the more kind of you can get from that, the more you can pull people and understand from your learners like what they care about. I think, just gives you a direction for where you should be focusing your growth efforts.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we do a similar thing at Accredible, actually, when we're looking at this in terms of we have about 4 personas which we focus on, and we know that not everyone is going to move through the path that's in the same way. So we've tried to, and it's not perfect, but we tried to bucket them so that then you can start to focus specifically on how you go after those. We call one like the dabbler or the newbie, etc. But they each have different habits and patterns, and if you can identify them, then you can kind of tap into that, which is pretty cool. Carly, coming back to you then, I'd love to hear, are there additional things that you've done to improve course completion and enrollment?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Are there additional things you're doing to improve enrollment and course completion?
So, like I said, we are trying to experiment with for the enrollment side of things, different ways to get these credentials in front of learners to help get the word out there of what we provide and what kind of programs they are. It is always a struggle for the completion. Especially, I do feel like our online programs, sometimes people do expect it to be a little easier than they are, because online you think just watching videos and taking maybe a self quiz, and we do make sure that people have to earn that certificate of completion, even though it is non-degree. So yeah, I think that is still a challenge we're working through for the completion side of things. But I mean, having the credential, to your earlier point, knowing that they will get that once they complete it, that is super valuable to them. So we do make sure that they are aware that that comes once they complete it. So hopefully that's starting to help.
And obviously we're just touching on the usage of data and analytics. I'd love to hear what you've done with that to maybe make program improvements.
We need to work more on using that. So I'm actually learning a lot from Julia now, which is amazing. We have started working with our Accredible rep to look into how can we use those. I think there's a weekly like top learner or top promoter, and see how we can maybe use that to promote them on LinkedIn and say, so there's definitely some ideas being thought about, but we have not quite implemented them yet.
No, it makes sense. We're always happy to support, of course.
Yes.
Julian, I'd love to hear from you. Since you've activated your Credential Flywheel, what's the biggest impact been, do you think?
I mean, we've just seen like the biggest like personal impact that I've seen from it. I think there's a lot of data things is like, we've just seen, if you go and search Workato certification on LinkedIn, now daily there are people posting it. which I think when I came to Workato, that wasn't really a motion that we had any insight into. We weren't pushing people there because we weren't using, a digital badging platform. And so like for me, that's always that kind of like real human moment of seeing people like legit be so excited to earn this badge and then go out of their way, not out of their way, because we know it's easy, right? But easily go and actually implement it and post it on LinkedIn and be excited about it. And so, when we think about our kind of flywheel, we have, users finding certifications through SEO and content that we're putting out. They actually are going and getting certified through our Automation Institute. They're getting awarded the badge through Accredible, and then sharing that certification via social, via their LinkedIn, via email. It's cool. I always liken it back to like that feeling when you leave the SATs, if you're in the US, or any type of standardized test, if you're global, like that feeling, that little like endorphin rush and like kind of relief that you've done it, you've earned it. And even though you might not know what your score is, like that is a bottled up version that we're giving people with these certifications and these badges that they're earning. And I think it really shows in how excited and, willing people are to share.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it is, yeah, I always think of it as one of those kind of like aha moments when people first start issuing for Accredible. And, we've talked through the process, we've said people are going to share, but there's nothing like that first couple of shares. We're like, oh my God, people are actually sharing these things and they're excited and the message is so positive. Yeah, it's very hard to buy that, which I think is what I think is so powerful about it. We get this win-win moment of, okay, well, they get to share their skills and competencies. We're creating credentials that hopefully are going to get them a better job, get them promoted, get them a raise, whatever it is. Or maybe they just took the course for fun. But ultimately, for me, it's that moment of pride that we harness. And there's something so powerful about it when you see that across LinkedIn of someone just shouting from the rooftops, I've done this thing. And you're right, it is that moment. I remember we have the GCSEs in the UK, so it's a little different. But yeah, that moment of finishing an exam, and you don't know whether you did well or did badly sometimes, but you are just ecstatic to have got over the line. And unfortunately, with digital credentials, we give them that real time moment to actually say, hey, I did this thing. Here you go. Here are my skills, competencies. So
yeah, like that it's the instant gratification that you seek in so many different aspects of life. And it's cool that we're able to do that type of thing for these learners now. And and with a lot of these digital credentials, like people are making shifts to change their lives, whether it's jobs or, increases in pay or all these different things. I think that there's this like equity being brought to education that is amplified through digital credentials.
100%. Love that. And what would you say is the best piece of feedback you've heard from learners about your credentialing process as you've, gone through all this?
Well, some of the video ones are pretty funny. Like someone on my team, this is not the best piece of feedback. It's just kind of funny. They were mad because he opened his mouth too much on the videos. When they're like, why does he open his mouth so wide? So like those are like funny. But then the real the real reason on like the feedback that I've heard from learners is like perceived value is real. Um, and the more you can add value to the offerings that you have and get your learners to perceive that value, I think the stronger your credentials will be in the market. Like when we talk about like the value of something in the market, when you look at a world where you're a crane operator, having a credential can be life or death. That's not the case for us in an automation integration space. But at the same time, like, how are you showing value to the people that are earning that? And so, we got feedback at one point that was like, this doesn't feel like the value matches what we're putting into it, right? So how do you fine tune that to make sure that the effort that's going in matches the value that they're getting out of the credential?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I always see these things as very iterative, right? I think if you're doing learning design correctly, it should be a constant kind of cycle of making sure that you're tweaking here and there. So it makes sense. And I guess before we go into the Q&A then, last couple of questions for you both. Any advice for folks? Yeah, I imagine a lot of folks in the audience either are issuing and maybe wanting to get more and maybe activate a true flywheel, or perhaps aren't doing anything. I'd love to hear from both of you any advice that you'd like to give to someone trying to get started.
I can give a quick piece of advice, I would say just get started and jump in. I mean, like kind of like I mentioned, Accredible has been there to support us through the whole journey. So it's not as intimidating as it might seem from the outside. And yeah, tweak along the way. You know, if you find something isn't quite working for your audience, you work with your account rep or, make your own little tweaks to emails and subject lines and descriptions or, there's a lot of tools within Accredible, like the skills, which will pull up different things and can be valuable for learners. So yeah, just get started is my advice.
I think on my side of thing, I mentioned it a couple times, but understand your learners and the behaviors that they want to see. And so a lot of times it maybe isn't, something super grand and it's like, hey, I just need to do X, Y, and Z in this product. And so when we think about it, it's, can you offer badges or credentials for membership, for usage, for things like that? Like, it doesn't always have to be the traditional cut and dry certification front to back program. Like, that is still super, super valuable. But I think there's this element that's emerging around, understanding user behavior and being able to award for different behaviors that aren't the traditional one as well. So I think just having an open mind to how Accredible can really help usher that piece of it and sort of understand how, hey, maybe I can award things that I didn't think of awarding before. So think outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, I love both of those. I can tie them both together because I think sometimes there's a fear, to your point, Carly, of, oh, well, this is this huge thing and I have to do all of this stuff to get started. And actually, for me, I kind of try to take that, no, let's just do one small thing and then we can grow from there. And taking your point, Julian, what that looks like is something like, well, look, we'd like to have an industry-leading certification program. Everyone does. However, what's the first step on that rung? And it may just be, hey, we're going to issue a credential for a webinar. We're going to issue a credential to our customers if they do something. There's so many different types of credentials, and okay, they may be differ in stakes. However, there's value across the board. And for us, we like to look at a framework of credentials whereby you start to bucket those. And, I always say about Accredible is that we are a technology platform, first and foremost, of course, an infrastructure for delivering digital credentials. But I think we recognize that the vast majority of folks are doing this for the first time. And therefore, my advice for anyone who's wanting to get started is lean in. We're more than happy to work as strategists and support in looking at how you can get something off the ground. So before we move into the Q&A then, one final question. What's next for the programs? Anything exciting on the horizon we should know about?
On our side, we want to integrate it more with the product. I think my grand vision for this whole thing would be to be able to have these credentials not just stand for you taking an exam, but actually badge and validate your proficiency with the product. There's so much data that we have, right? Whether you've created campaigns or what we call recipes or things like that, we can harness that data and be able to say, hey, this credential is actually for someone that, used, a platform like HubSpot, for example, that's built out 100 landing pages that converted a 20% rate or higher, and actually taking those data pieces we have on people with the things that they're actually doing in the product and badging those. So I think we're a little ways off from that, but that's where I really want to take this because the doing aspect is so important, especially when it comes to kind of these tech tools and things that are everywhere.
Perfect. How about you, Carly?
So I think I've mentioned kind of these throughout, but we are kind of working to better utilize some of those features already within Accredible, like ensuring all of our programs have those skills associated with them to just add some more value to our learners. We kind of think this information is going to be helpful to both the employers who are looking to maybe hire people who have those skills, but also the learners alike in this current learning environment. And we're exploring how to use some of the pathways feature that's kind of newer to either promote those skills or promote what's coming, what programs to take next. Did you enjoy this program? Well, you might enjoy this one. So yeah, we're kind of trying to utilize some of the tools that are already there and just, like I keep mentioning, get more eyes on our programs to just let people know what we offer.
Love it. And yeah, pathways, probably for another webinar, but for those not in the know, gives you the ability to build kind of linear or non-linear pathways of badges that stack up to final completion, which is really cool. And it has the added benefit that as people are kind of going through this, I hesitate to use the word gamification with high stakes credentials, but I will. Maybe we'll use engagement is better, but it engages people to move through the pathway and helps with completion.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So I hope we've got some audience questions, Patty.
Yes, we do. And before we jump into that, a big thank you, Julian, Carly, and Duncan for that conversation. We have great questions in the chat, but before we jump into those, we're going to just do one more poll here. Are you currently reporting credential recipient engagement to your larger organization? So are you doing that to senior leadership only, to the entire organization, or you're not doing that yet? Are you currently reporting credential recipient engagement to your larger organization? Just a few more seconds on that. Looks like 49% of respondents are not. So looks like more than half are sharing engagement with a larger organization. Carly and Julian, how are you reporting to your larger organization, specifically about credential recipient engagement?
We are not, so we are part of the no. I think, in higher education specifically, things move a little slower than other spaces. So we're still in the educating the organization about the value of them. And I think we're, very slowly getting there. So hopefully soon we will do a better job of that, of the reporting.
We do report to the entire Oregon leadership. We have something that's called VMTs, Vision Method Target. It's basically just KPI, OKR, just with a different name. So we track things like training depth. We found that when you had 4+ users with a certain credential, the usage of the product was way higher. So we use that data point to then say, hey, let's focus on getting 4+ users in an account for this. We look at things like training attach rate, to trying to get 100% of customers to have at least one person going through the content and getting credentialed, share rate, things like that. So we have kind of like a roster of 6 or 7 core metrics that we focus on, that we report to leadership and QBRs, that the whole organization also gets privy to. So yeah, it's nice to have an organization that cares about it, right? And has, we get a chance to be able to share kind of how we're progressing with things.
I love the maturity of that, Julian. That's awesome. Duncan, this question is for you. Can Accredible resend credentials to recipients who've not opened them yet after a certain amount of time as a reminder?
Yes. Yeah, okay. It's a short answer. Yes. So we will send an automatic reply. Spoiler, marketing closure is we are actually going to be launching an email trigger feature coming up as well, which is going to give us way more feature set around this too. But yes, you can. So the aim, of course, we want to make sure as many people are engaging as possible, and we're aware that sometimes that first email may get missed. So yes.
As a lucky one with a sneak peek, it's awesome.
Love to hear that, Julian. And if anybody out there is going to be at the ATP Innovations and Testing Conference or the One EdTech Digital Credentials Conference, we'll be there and we'll be talking all about email marketing triggers at both. So there's a couple questions here about how you run your programs. And I think this is a great question. Julian and Carly, how much time do you use to develop the recipient experience? So is that someone's full-time job, or do you have credentialing managers? I know, Julian, I know what your titles are. We talked about that, but do you have someone who's focusing specifically on the recipient experience, and how much resource do you put into that?
We do have a someone who, is that client-facing person who helps with when people either don't get that email that, I think Duncan mentioned earlier, just knowing that it's coming is a big help. And so if they know that they didn't get it, someone's there to help either reissue it or send a link out. But it's not a full-time job. I would say, a couple people have their hands in our Accredible account to help with things like that. But there's one person who has, I don't even think it's half of his job, honestly. So yeah, it's a part of one job.
We have program managers for kind of like our different subsets of education and credentials. And then we have someone who's a growth program manager who focuses on kind of like overall program growth and some of the activities around that. And so I would say it's like the learner experience and kind of like that, and what that actually looks like is probably like 10 or 20% of what this person's working on. So it's not huge, just because they're sort of spread out across a bunch of different credentials, but the goal is that it's consistent enough across all of them.
Great, thank you both for those answers. Yeah, you're welcome. I dropped in some information there into those conferences that I threw out. So there's a great question here. Duncan, another one for you. Is there sometimes, in the credentialing world, someone no longer meets the requirements of having the credential that they were initially issued, and you need to take that back? So is there an easier way to remove someone's badge in a bulk way if they don't meet requirements, or an individual way? And Julian and Carly, have either of you had to do that? And if so, how's your experience been?
So happy to take one first. So this is a complex beast, right? Because removing a credential that someone's earned is, we could talk a lot about this, frankly, and especially if they've hit the previous requirements. In theory, possible to remove the credential utilizing the API at scale, but that's not a problem. I think the bigger thing is, should you? If we normally would recommend is that you expire that credential, you keep it live so that everyone can see that person did hold that credential previously, and then you work with them to work on the new credential, hit the requirements, and issue a new one. That would be my personal recommendation. I think it's really important that we have a record of the credentials that were issued, and it's important that we have a record that person did hold an active credential at a certain point in time.
That's what we do on our side, is expire them. I've had cases in the past, like when I was at HubSpot, where we revoked them because we found that people had like cheated on certain things like that. That's, I think, the one case that I would say, where there's a valid reason for removing it, but the expiration piece is really good. And I like what you put there, Duncan, about they earned it at one point, right? And let's not take that piece away from them.
And we have not had to do that.
Okay. So one last question before we wrap things up. So someone mentioned that they're just getting started with this process, and their program is 12 months of continuous learning. So they're wondering if either of you, or if Duncan, you have any examples of someone doing other than a one and done credential where, it's a completion certificate for a larger program. Carly, are you breaking up your programs into smaller, where folks earn credentials for completing certain modules or things like that? Are either of you doing that? Or Duncan, do you have any examples? And we'll try to have about max minute and a half for this.
Great. So we do have a longer program that's 12 months long, actually, and it is kind of broken up into one core, and then they take electives, which they get credentials for each elective they take. And then once they complete the whole thing, they get the larger certificate. We also have like 6-month-long programs that we're hopefully going to start experimenting with badging for those assignments that you just mentioned, Patty. So I think there are a couple ways to go about it depending on your program and what makes the most sense. But yeah, it's definitely something we've done and had success with. And it is a long time when you're talking 12 months, but I think if you add in those touch points, that really helps that engagement and, excitement.
Keeps people excited to get the next one, right?
Yes, exactly.
We have, I would say, shorter cycles, but we do have our role-based certifications, which, involve taking multiple classes. And, the good news on our front is that, we don't have to time bound it with people. And so they can kind of do self-paced for that, but there's a whole path that they need to get their integration developer certification or things like that.
So I think in 30 seconds, this comes back to that kind of low stakes, high stakes that I was talking about, and the ability, I think, to build out a credentialing framework. And I think once you've done that, it makes it a lot easier to start bucketing these things. And what I'd be looking at is, okay, we don't want to over issue because, again, we're not gamifying here. We don't want to dilute the value. But you want to find an opportunity to issue credentials throughout the learning journey through the 12 months that stack towards that final completion, but obviously showcase something that is hopefully career or noteworthy or a competency or a skill, etc. So I think there's a few ways to go about it, but I would probably look at utilizing something like badges throughout the course and then issue a final completion certificate to delineate between the two.
And
Credential inflation can be real.
Yeah, I was going to say every time that someone receives that badge for completing a course, they'll share that to their networks, and you're not just getting that, organic marketing effort from your recipients one time, you're getting it with every module they complete, because it's exciting to share those things and to show your progress to your network.
Correct. But I'll reiterate, less is more. I'm very much focused on less is more here. You want to find that sweet spot.
Totally. Well, thanks to everybody for submitting your questions. I know that we weren't able to get to all of them, but we really appreciate seeing what questions you have. That helps us know what questions we can answer in the future. And it's been exciting to hear from everyone's successes and learning from your challenges. So we heard today 2 great examples of organizations having success growing their programs, but they are not anomalies. So here's some data from other Accredible users of the last year. In 2023 alone, organizations issued nearly 25 million digital credentials through Accredible, and those institutions saw a collective 19% growth in engagement with credentials over that year. And we had 80,000 new courses added last year just by our users, so we know that you all are just getting started. And those numbers, those are amazing. And at Accredible, we're working tirelessly to continue to improve supporting your learners' journeys for you. So you've seen it in your emails leading up to this event, and you'll get another invitation shortly to view our new Credential Flywheel guide. And that highlights a lot of what we talked about today and walks you through how your organization can harness the power of Accredible to take your program to the next level. So please share this guide wisely and use it to help guide the evolution of your program. So one more big thanks to Julian, Carly, and Duncan for sharing their time with us today. We are grateful. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
So
Bye, everyone.